To the members of First Presbyterian Church, I say this with all sincerity, I love your pastor. I do not, however, love everything about him. I don't love his affection for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't yet understand what a Buckeye even is. I don't appreciate his insensitivity with regards to Deflategate and my beloved New England Patriots. However, I do love him deeply. As a person, as a leader, and mostly as a friend. But more on my affection for Kevin and its connection to this week's scriptural reading in a little bit. I want to begin with an appropriate football story to set the stage for the lesson. Gale Sayers was a great running back in the NFL for the Chicago Bears. In a game against the San Francisco 49ers, he suffered a season-ending knee injury. During the offseason, his best friend and fellow running back, Brian Piccolo, helped him rehab the knee. Sayers was able to come back the next season. He regained his old form. And during that return season for Sayers, however, his good friend, Brian Piccolo, was diagnosed with cancer. He tried to play through it, but he was in the hospital more than he was in the game, and Sayers flew to his bedside to be near him as much as possible. At the end of that season, Sayers received a prestigious award, the award for being the most courageous player in pro football. Sayers had invited Piccolo and his wife to sit with him and his wife, but Brian was in the hospital getting worse day by day. As Sayers stood to receive the award, tears welled up in his eyes because he knew that the friend who helped him achieve success in his comeback was dying of cancer. So when he accepted the award, he said, "You flatter me by giving me this award, but I tell you here and now that I accept it for Brian Piccolo. Brian Piccolo is the man of courage who should receive the George Halas Award. I love Brian Piccolo, and I would like for you to love him as well." This was the kind of friendship that David had with Jonathan. If Ruth and Naomi give us the classic story of friendship between women in the Bible, David and Jonathan are the archetypes of men who love one another. Their friendship is another instance of how love can transcend difference. Like Ruth and Naomi, the friendship of David and Jonathan is pivotal to a bigger narrative, bigger than simply that of two human beings. The first book of Samuel has as its theme the beginnings of the kingship in ancient Israel. After what turned out to be a false start with Saul, God is determined, says the text, to make sure that what replaces Saul's kingship will endure in time. Only the storyteller knows the outcome, which is that David will be established as king over Israel, and that he will be the father of a dynasty. The protagonist in the story, however, is not David. Actually, it's Saul's son, Jonathan. It is his soul, according to the text, that is knit or bound to the soul of David. Just as Ruth clung to Naomi, Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Then Jonathan instigates a covenant of loyalty with King David, or about to be King David. And as a mark of his love, he strips himself of his robe and he offers it to David, together with his armor, with his sword, and with his bow and his belt. Think about that image. He took off his robe and he gave it to David. Now, I joke with Kevin and I tell him that someday I would love to wear his beautiful, multicolored, flowing robe. And I have a visual image one day of him taking that off and giving it to me. And because we're the same size, I would imagine that it would just fit beautifully on me, and I would be filled with his presence delivering a sermon. It's probably a good idea that we did not do that today. But in one of the most intimate and touching scenes in the Hebrew Bible, we can picture what happens. Symbolically, Jonathan, the current king's son, renounces his own claim on the throne in order to give that place to David, the man he knows in his heart should be king. He is pledging his allegiance to the one he knows will inherit the kingdom. Giving away his robe and all the regalia to his friend identifies David as the heir from this point forward. But underlying the politics of God and nations lies one of the most profound human dramas to be found anywhere in any literature. It's a story not simply of warrior and prince, but a story of two men. Perhaps we men are nervous of the kind of intimacy portrayed in this story. In David and Jonathan, we see a friendship between men that is expressed in precisely those same terms of a covenant that endures until death. When Jonathan divests himself of his robe and his armor, he is saying to David, "Let there be nothing between us, nothing to get in the way of our knowing each other as undefended people, I and thou, human being to human being, man to man." Now, when Jonathan was slain, David composed an elegy over the slaughter of Jonathan and Saul, which we just read, which is one of the most magnificent pieces of poetry and is oftentimes called the Song of the Bow. I grieve for you, my brother Jonathan. You were most dear to me, more than the love of women. How the mighty have fallen, the weapons of war perished. The friendship of Jonathan and David, as described in the book of Samuel, is perhaps one, if not the most poignant example in all of the Bible of the power of human relationships. Their friendship is held as the ideal, a friendship in which neither made demands of the other and each gave generously of himself. In Pirkei Avot, which we translate as the ethics of our ancestors, this is a small section of our Talmud, cleaving to friends is listed among the 48 virtues that one needs in order to fully acquire the knowledge of the Torah. At first, it might seem strange that the rabbis included friendship among such virtues as fear, awe, and humility. Yet there are many examples in Jewish texts of the importance placed on friendship. The Talmud suggests that in order to successfully study and internalize Torah, one must surround oneself with friends of good character and intellectual clarity, who are both good-hearted and perform good deeds. Our sages taught that one must exert great effort in cultivating a friendship, even to the extent of giving up personal preferences to those of one's friends. In this way, each of the two friends will seek to please the other and together they will build common goals and interests. The Talmud also suggests that a good friend serves 3 functions. The first is as a catalyst for increased success at sacred study. The second is to help ensure one's moral compass, for good friends feel free to offer constructive criticism to one another. The third function is to provide good advice in all areas and to act as a confidant who does not reveal secrets to others. Rabbi Jonah in this passage adds that a good friend will also gloss over a small injustice committed by the other, thus endearing them to one another. A famous rabbi teaches, friendship is like a stone. By itself, a stone has no value. But when you rub 2 stones properly, sparks of fire emerge. David and Jonathan had that kind of friendship. And we can learn an awful lot about their friendship and apply it to our own friendships in life. One lesson we learn from David and Jonathan is to maintain a humble spirit. Both of them were humble. The opposite of the proud, unrepentant, rebellious, suspicious, or envious one. They talk to one another about the covenant to be kind. And there's a phrase that they share with one another, regardless of whether Jonathan was the heir to the throne or David was the heir to the throne. When they talk to one another, they would refer to each other as thy servant, the utmost in humility. A humble spirit is central to kindness. Competition can bring contention. David and Jonathan also display honesty in their friendship. David and Jonathan have an absolute honesty amongst them. Why is honesty vital in friendship? Because without honesty, there can be no trust. If you want to have meaningful relationships, you must be an honest person. Where there is no honesty, there is no trust. Where there is no trust, there can be no true friendship. This covenant was built on honesty. David must literally trust his own life to Jonathan. And that's not an easy thing for him to do, considering, if you're familiar with the book of Samuel, that for most of the first book, Jonathan's father is trying to figure out ways to kill David. The poet Santayana said that your friend was that part of the human race with whom you can be yourself. This entails a degree of unafraid openness that is beyond many of us. This was the openness between David and Jonathan. David and Jonathan's friendship is something for us all to emulate. The Song of Songs says, love is as strong as death. And for Jonathan and David, their love is literally as strong as death. And no amount of personal danger, no number of attempts on their lives can dissolve or loosen that bond. Friendship can be risky. It's risky to step across the invisible boundary that separates us from each other. It is risky to befriend a stranger and to embrace a neighbor. It is risky to open your home in hospitality and to welcome a stranger into your living room. It is risky to enter into community with people who might not look like you or who might come from other cultures. It is risky to socialize with those whom society calls outcasts. It is risky to get involved in politics on behalf of the vulnerable. It is risky to be generous, risky to offer a brother or sister the bread off your table or the shirt off your back. Some might also say that it is risky for clergy of differing faiths to become close friends. Or it is risky for religious leaders to bring their constituents into each other's houses of worship. But risky friendship is God's kind of love. And it is the love that knows no fear. For as the Song of Songs taught, love is as strong as death. I am beyond happy that our two congregations have taken the risk to get to know one another, the risk to worship together. I am glad for our greater community, for our individual congregations, that we have learned from David and Jonathan about the value of friendship. And on a very personal note, I am blessed to have found a true friend in your pastor. One, and I shared this on Friday, with whom I share more in common, theologically, spiritually, and personally, than I do with many of my own rabbinic colleagues. Kevin and I will never agree when it comes to football, and that's okay. But I hope that the bonds of friendship only deepen between us and between our congregations as together we move forward to do God's work.